Week 4 is here, top DPS. We're about to break it down. You are not going to believe what class is falling like 5 or 6 slots in the raid this week, and some are moving up way higher and way faster than we expected with the buffs last week. We have some Mythic Secret logs to look at today, and we're also going to be checking out what the meta is for Mythic Plus this week, see if that's changed. So let's get right into it. Let's go ahead and pull up the logs, the statistics for 95th percentile of 1 week. If we take a look at the 2-week range first, Fire Mage, Enhancement Shaman, Arcane Mage, and then DKs over 1 week. And it looks like everything's kind of started to normalize here in the DPS lineup. We have Beastmasters performing exceptionally well in single target. Every spec of Shaman doing well. Every spec of Mage doing pretty well. Especially in Mythic Plus. Frost Mage, not so much in Raid, but this is Mythic logs. We actually don't have any Mythic logs from the last boss yet. So to take a look at why Fire Mage is doing so well, what we want to do is kind of just drop down and look at each boss and see if Fire Mage is doing anything exceptional to be number one. I have a feeling that Fire Mage does really well in AoE, but maybe not so much in single target because Arcane is the premier single target. But let's take a look at that. So Queen Onsrek, we still don't have any logs. And the Silken Court, over a range of 1 week, we see that Arcane, we only have a few logs for this probably. So this is why it's sort of looking like this. Let's take a look at Nexus Princess Kaiveza. And you can see that very clearly here on this fight, there are no Fire Mages. This is primarily a single target fight with no ads and a lot of movement. So the classes that are performing the best, naturally, Enhancement Shaman and BM Hunters for single target with a lot of movement, where Arcane has to play exceptionally well in order to be top DPS in this fight, because they have to, they are ranged DPS and they require casting, which requires them to plant. So melee should be very high on this fight. Let's take a look at Blood Twister. Now, this is one that's interesting. This is a pure AoE fight. This is probably going to be all DKs at the top, followed by Fury Warriors. Balance Druid is doing really well. Frost Mage is doing good. They're able to have a lot of damage on the run, consistent damage. Fire Mage actually outperforming Arcane Mage here as well. And of course, a lot of melee classes up there as well in AoE targets. And Assassination doing quite well as well, which is great for them because they are kind of a Fire Mage profile where they need the mobs to live a long time to do a bunch of damage. Roshanon, burst damage, single target fight with some burst damage to add. So naturally, Warrior fits that profile very well, and Arcane Mage lining up their cooldowns to do big damage to adds when they spawn. So those two classes doing well. Assassination, BM, just pure single target pretty much. Marksman, big burst damage to adds. They do well. Fire Mage, if they line their cooldowns up, they pretty much just cleaving off the main boss. Survival Hunters, every Hunter doing really well on Roshanon, surprisingly, which is great. Glad to see all the Hunters doing well in a specific fight. Sikrin, BM Hunter, this is pure single target. It's going to be BM Hunter, Enhancement Shaman, Arcane Mage. This is just a straight up target dummy fight. And yeah, the top 3 right here are very clear what the top single target classes are in the game, and that is it right there pretty much. BM Hunter, Enhanced Shaman, Arcane, in that order for top DPS for single target. Now, Bloodbound Horror and Olgrax, like these two are probably where we have the most amount of logs. This fight is interesting because in the Bloodbound Horror, this fight has a single target in the top phase, and then you have maybe like 2 target with a little bit of cleave in the down phase. So I'm not really sure who's going to be top on this fight, to be honest. Surprisingly, Fire Mage and of course Shamans just performing well in no matter what fight it is. Shamans are clearly the hero class of this expansion. If you're playing a Shaman, you're having a good time no matter what spec that you're playing. They're literally insane, and they have a 12-second kick, and they have Lust. It's just incredible, their kit. If you're playing a Shaman, you are in good hands. And if you're playing Mage, you're also probably having a good time too. It's just you need to be balancing back and forth between a lot of different specs. And so if you're playing one spec of Mage, it may or may not be good at certain things. Fire Mage is great at cleaving down one high health target and letting other things around it rot. So maybe that's why it's performing pretty well. And this one, I imagine Fire Mage may be doing decent with the ads in the first boss as well. Looks like it's all Frost DK. If they time their cooldowns well, they get a big damage to all the ads that come out. And then Fire Mage is able to do well, I guess, in Havoc. Havoc's doing surprisingly well on this fight also, but this fight is, I mean, it's super easy, this fight. You just do single target to the boss, and then there's some ads that come out, and it's back to single target. It's just burst damage to ads. But over a long period of time, it seems like Frost Death Knight is just blowing people out of the water on this fight. Okay, so there's your breakdowns for Mythic logs. Now, if we take a look at the entire raid for Heroic, we have a ton of logs on Heroic. And let's do over a range of 1 week. Wow, Devastation Evoker has made some serious leaps. In the past week, we have our top 3 Enhanced Shaman just performing exceptionally well in every fight. Same with Arcane Mage, and then most of the other classes have like a unique niche where they tend to be good on 1 or 2 fights that kind of boost them up in the rankings. DKs have really fallen down in the rankings on Heroic. Maybe DKs need a little bit more ramp time on the mobs, or the mobs are just dying too quickly in Heroic. I think Heroic was a bit undertuned from the first 7 bosses in this raid. The last boss is clearly the pub stomper in the Heroic raid this tier. So DK is just not able to do well there. But if you flop it to Mythic, and you can see when the mobs have a little bit more health, the DK stocks start to rise up, and which is why they're really good in high keys. Same with Fire Mage. Fire Mage tend to be good in high keys when they have time for their damage profiles to ramp. So keep that in mind. If you're playing a DK, it might look like you're down bad in Heroic, but when you get into Mythic, your damage will start to rise. Same with Fire Mage. Like, you might not be doing that much damage in a 5 key, but when you get to like a 12 key, Fire Mage really starts to kick in, and that's when they start to do big damage, especially when paired with an Augment Evoker or a Priest or something like that. All right, if we take a look at this chart from last week in the Mythic section, we can see who is starting to rise as the numbers start to flatten out, as we start to get more logs on Silken Court. We have no logs currently on the last boss on Queen Ansarek at this point in time. Going to be quite some time before we can get a real overall look at what classes are performing best in the raid as a whole. But at this point, I think we probably should start going off of most Mythic logs instead of Heroic logs, because Heroic is starting to die way too quickly to get a real accurate description of what classes are performing. So this is last week's Mythic logs, and this is this week's. Looks like Enhancement Shamans are up 1 slot. BM Hunters have fallen 2 slots. BM is rising above Ellie and above Havoc now. So BM stocks are going up as they start to get more gear. They are starting to perform even better in raid than previous weeks. Devastation Evoker up several slots here. They're moving up with Marksman Hunter, and Rep Pallies and Arms Warriors are going down as more and more gear starts to come into the picture. Some classes with better profiles, timing their cooldowns better, etc., are starting to rise over the Arms Warrior Rep Paladin meta. Survival Hunter has fallen dramatically. Marksman Hunters have passed him. Survival Hunters have fallen about 5 slots this week. Feral Druid has risen above the Warlocks and above the Rogues. Feral Druid is outperforming Warlocks and Rogues on Mythic logs in the 95th percentile, which is crazy to see Feral Druid beating all of the Rogue specs. Balanced Druid got some buffs. They are rising. Frost Mage holding about the same, and then Windwalker is really falling here below 2 specs of Warlocks and all of the Mages, all of the Druids. Shadow Priest just continuously kind of down bad, and Augment Evoker they don't really get the credit that they deserve, I believe, in the logs, because they're boosting other people's stats. So Aug will always show at the bottom. But they're really not at the bottom in my opinion. But they don't really perform as well as Devastation Evokers do. If you are playing any of these new classes that are up, congratulations, guys. I think that some of these classes will continue to rise. DKs, Mages, Shamans, Hunters in Raid still being very dominant. Havoc Demon Hunter stonks are starting to rise, and same with Devastation Evokers. So any of these classes over the course of the entire Raid are having a good time. Just performing exceptionally well overall in the raid. So there's the current meta for the Naruba Palace rankings. Let's take a look and see how the meta is forming over in Mythic Plus right now. We can close out last week's chart and go ahead and widen this up. So we still have it looks like in the tank category, guys, in the top 10, we have a solid mixture of tanks still. Yoda playing literally every tank, and his team is kind of swapping tanks around just depending on the key to see, I guess, how high they can push. This is one thing pretty cool about Yoda's team, is that they all play multiple different characters and they're always pushing high keys on all of their characters. And that way, at the really high meta, he can play whatever class that they want. Let's take a look at some of the comps that they're using. Using Frost Mage, Frost DK, Augment Evoker, Resto Shaman, and look at, I mean, this is just getting more and more disgusting every single week. Every team is using a Resto Shaman. I mean, there's literally one Priest, two Preservation Evokers in the top keys, like in 13 keys. And you really aren't seeing much variety in the healer, in the healing section. It's pretty much every team at this level. These keys, what happens at level 12, guys, is the keys increase and they start hitting for 20% harder, and you almost can't survive the hits without an Aug Evoker. And so Aug Evoker's damage reduction starts to come into play here, and classes like Mage that can mass shield, DKs that can immune, like immunity classes like pretty much Mage and DK that can immune a lot of mechanics, start to come into play here, and they start to come online. Also, knock up from the Mage, you have grips from the DK. Maybe a really good Affliction Warlock could a Warlock could live, because they tend to have a higher health profile. Rogues can, you know, feint or cloak some of the damage. Classes that have immunities are going to perform very well here. Enhancement Shaman, you know, has decent defensives that they can live through multiple hits. Warriors looking pretty dominant here, as well as Guardian Druids and Vengeance Demon Hunters, although Yoda is playing exceptionally well on the Blood DK, so he's able to time some 13 keys as well. This is new. Balanced Druids being in the top 10. We didn't have this last week. There are 2 Balanced Druids in the top 10 keys in the world, timing 14s. On Mist and Arakara seem to be the only ones that are able to be timed right now on a 14. And in the 13 category, we have Dawn, Arakara, and Mist. Have there been any more? Yeah, Necrotic Wake has been timed on 13. Siege has been timed on 13. Most keys have been timed now on 13. It looks like 14 is the new wall overall for top keys. So if we're looking at timing 14s or 13s, mainly 14. Okay, there has been a 14 Siege that's been timed. But every 14 that's been timed has a Augment Evoker, except for one Chinese team that timed a 14 Mist without an Aug Evoker, using Ellie Shaman, Assassin Rogue, and Frost DK. On really high keys, it just seems to be the meta that you're going to need an Aug Evoker in order to help survive the hits for the damage reduction. But there you go. That right now, these are the classes that are pretty much meta for very high keys. You don't need to be meta classes to time in 11s, but anything 12 or higher, the keys start to hit very hard. You need a certain amount of item level, health, versatility, and comp comes into play with all of these classes. But if you are playing, you know, one of the meta classes, you should be having a good time getting into groups, and you should be performing exceptionally well if you get into a solid group with some item level. That's it for my review, guys, of what the current meta is for the state of the War Within right now in week 4. If you like these videos, we'll break down everything every single week. Just hit the subscribe button, and we'll be back next Monday. I'm Sardako. I stream live on Twitch every day at 4 p.m. Central, and I'll see you there.